She tried to shoot my newborn baby, officer, and she's calling it a compliance issue. That's what I said, standing over the cradle, my voice shaking more from fury than fear. Across from me, Rosetta Crail, president of the Redwood Crossings HOA, adjusted her blazer, the barrel of her pistol still smoking faintly. Her tone was calm, dismissive, like this was paperwork. "I discharged accidentally," she said, chin lifting. "You've been warned about unauthorized fixtures on common view property. The baby bassinet violated code 14.7. The side rail of my daughter's cradle was split down the middle. A fresh bullet hole burned through the walnut grain. My wife's hands were still trembling, where she'd pulled our daughter away seconds too late." I looked straight at Rosetta. "That cradle held my child, not a decoration," she smirked. "Rules apply to everyone, Dr. Vaylor." What she didn't know was that every inch of this porch was under layered acoustic capture, from an array I designed myself. I could recreate every sound wave, every decibel, every heartbeat between her threat and that shot. I've testified in federal court about bullet trajectories through concrete. She thought she could hide one through wood? Subscribe now, because this was the shot that made a national jury cry. And it all started right here, in a neighborhood that confused silence with safety. I'm Dr. Callan Vaylor, forensic acoustic reconstructionist. I don't do politics, I do proof. I once mapped a battlefield explosion using nothing but sound decay and wind data. But today's evidence isn't from a war zone. It's from the porch where my newborn daughter almost died. That cradle, built from my late father's desk, was the only place Eve slept without monitors screaming. My father carved that wood by hand when he came home from the mill, said, "Walnut keeps a child's dreams warm." I turned it into something new, something safe. To Rosetta Crail, it was unsightly. A threat to curb appeal. 2 weeks earlier, she sent a notice. "Remove unauthorized wooden object. Violates community harmony standards." She underlined object, not cradle, not bassinet. Object. I sent her a doctor's letter explaining Eve's premature lungs, her sensitivity to artificial materials. Rosetta mailed back a fine and a note. Medical exceptions encourage favoritism. She wasn't enforcing bylaws, she was performing dominance. Our HOA had turned into her stage, and my family was her example. Neighbors whispered about her rounds, her clipboard, her camera, her claim that noise defines character. They joked she'd find the win next, but no one stood up. Because Rosetta Crail had something everyone feared, authority wrapped in the illusion of order. I should have known she'd push further. That evening, Alessa was on the porch feeding Eve when Rosetta came striding up the walk, clipboard in one hand, gun on her hip. She called out, "I warned you, noise after 9 p.m. is a citation. Infants are not exempt." Alessa froze. "She's a baby." "She's a disturbance," Rosetta snapped. And that's when Eve cried. The sudden pitch made her flinch, hand dropping toward her holster. I was halfway down the steps when she fired. The shot split the cradle's edge and punched through the air, missing my daughter's head by inches. The scent of gunpowder clung to the lavender pot beside the rail. I remember the silence that followed. No sirens yet, no neighbors outside. Just the hum of my sensors feeding data to the forensic cloud I never thought I'd need here. Rosetta stared at the bullet hole, then at me. "You provoked this," she said flatly. "By existing," I asked. Officer Jennings arrived first, lights painting the street in blue streaks. He took one look at the cradle, then at Rosetta's gun. "What the hell happened?" "Accidental discharge," she repeated, perfectly rehearsed. I replayed the audio clip on my phone, her voice seconds before the shot. "Then I'll make the baby stop." The color drained from her face. Jennings turned toward me. "You pressing charges?" I looked at the shattered walnut, the cradle my father's hands once built, and my daughter's life had nearly ended in. I said, "Not just charges. I want a federal record of every second she held that gun." Rosetta didn't flinch when they cuffed her. Not when Officer Jennings read her Miranda rights. Not when the paramedics brushed past her to check Alessa's cheek. Not even when Eve's biometric monitor beeped twice in panic tones I'd learned to recognize in the NICU. She just stood there, arms behind her back, calmly stating that she had followed HOA response protocol and feared for her safety. It was the same phrase she used when she fined a veteran neighbor for flying a flag over regulation height. The HOA building sits at the center of Redwood Crossings, like a smug little courthouse. Gray brick, mirrored glass, soundproofed interior. A space designed more for silencing complaints than resolving them. That's where this started weeks ago. They were handing out fines like flyers. One woman got cited for hanging wind chimes that were audible during regulated quiet hours. A dad got written up for letting his kids play chalk hopscotch on the common sidewalk. Then it was us. We moved in 5 months ago, hoping Eve could breathe better near the coast. Alessa's OB said the air quality would help, but by month 2, we'd been cited for 3 things: our cradle, Alessa nursing in public view, and noise from a portable oxygen monitor we used before Eve was weaned off supplemental support. At first, I thought it was a mistake, until I saw the pattern. Rosetta didn't just hate kids, she hated their presence. Her bylaws weren't about aesthetics. They were about removal. Quiet was her power, and silence her tool. I remember the first time I confronted her at the HOA meeting. I brought evidence: acoustic graphs, timestamps, citations compared to decibel levels that wouldn't register higher than a quiet conversation. She sat at the end of that long marble table, hands folded, surrounded by the same 4 board members who nodded at everything she said. "This isn't a courtroom, Dr. Vaylor," she told me. "This is a community, and in this community, we vote on peace." I said, "Peace doesn't come from control. It comes from respect." She smiled. "Control is respect when the alternative is disorder." Calvin Drew was there, groundskeeper, wears the same brown vest no matter the weather. He stood near the wall like he wasn't supposed to speak, but I saw his eyes flinch every time Rosetta talked. I didn't know it then, but he'd been keeping records. Quiet ones, logs of her late-night patrols, unofficial fines, things that never made it into HOA meeting minutes. He nodded at me once as I left that night, didn't say a word, just that nod, like someone saying, "You're not crazy, but you're alone." Back in the present, Alessa sat in our living room holding Eve. She was crying now, not Eve, but my wife. Silent tears. I'd cleaned the blood from her cheek. Just a graze, no stitches. But we both knew that wasn't the real damage. "She was going to shoot her," Alessa whispered. "I know. I couldn't move fast enough. You did. You pulled her back." Her hands were shaking. "I saw the barrel, Cal. I saw it level with the rail." That rail. The place my daughter rested her hand every afternoon when the breeze came through. That hand was now bruised from splinters, but she was alive. We didn't sleep that night. I spent hours pulling data. Not from the police, from my logs. Every camera, every sensor, audio filtered through noise reduction filters I'd written years ago. I watched the moment over and over, her fingers flexing on the grip, her left foot stepping inward to stabilize, the twitch in her shoulder when Eve's cry peaked. It wasn't an accident. At 4:13 a.m., I isolated the sound signature of her safety disengaging. It was 2 full seconds before the gun fired. The police had opened a report. They hadn't filed charges yet, so I prepared my own. I submitted everything: audio, visual, angle projections, metadata trails. I forwarded it not just to Jennings, but to the district attorney's office, Child Protective Services, and, because Rosetta had a concealed carry license, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Rosetta thought this was about silence. She had no idea she was up against someone who heard everything. Calvin Drew didn't knock. He never did. He just appeared, like wind or rain, quiet, steady, and never out of place. This time, it was around dusk, just as I was testing audio contrast levels on the cradle footage. I saw his reflection first in the monitor's glare, then heard the soft creak of the side gate closing behind him. I met him at the porch. He glanced at the broken rail, then at the camera mounted above the door. "She really did it, huh?" he said softly. "She fired with intent," I replied. "I can prove that." Calvin rubbed the back of his neck. He looked older than last week, shoulders lower, eyes heavier. "She always talked like she'd do something like that," he muttered, "but I didn't think she'd actually pull a trigger." He wasn't dressed in his usual work vest, just a faded polo and jeans, no clipboard, no earpiece. And in his hand, a worn leather notebook with bent corners. I said nothing and stepped aside. He took that as permission. Inside, Eve was asleep on Alessa's chest, a small, steady breath. I could see the crusted red on Alessa's shirt, where the splinters had scratched her shoulder. Neither of us had the energy to change clothes, only to make sure Eve kept breathing. Calvin nodded once at Alessa. "I won't stay long." She gave him a tired look. "You were there, weren't you, when she called my baby a noise violation?" His jaw flexed. "Yes, ma'am." I gestured toward the kitchen. Calvin followed, setting the notebook on the table. I didn't need to ask what was inside. He opened it carefully, like it might break. "I started keeping notes 4 months ago, after she fired James Woodrow for not repainting his driveway lines fast enough." I flipped through. Dates, times, locations, even sketches of Rosetta's patrol routes through the neighborhood. One page had underlined phrases: threatened citation for baby stroller, verbal warning issued for sidewalk drawing, clipboard confrontation, child with popsicle. "I'm not an investigator," he said. "I just got tired of pretending I didn't hear the things she said." I kept turning pages. Some were cross-referenced with addresses. My address appeared 5 times in the last 3 weeks. "She knew about my background," I said quietly. "Used it against me, claimed I was hostile, said surveillance equipment on my home was a sign of aggression." "She said you were paranoid," Calvin confirmed. "Told the board your tech was dangerous, but she didn't say it to your face, only in closed sessions." I paused. "And you were there?" "I take notes for the maintenance agenda. She forgets I'm still in the room." I studied him. Thin frame, weathered skin, a man who wanted no trouble, but somehow found himself waist-deep in it. "You saw her hand move," I said. "Before the shot." He didn't answer immediately, just stared at the floor. "I did," he said finally. "I saw her draw. I saw her brace. That wasn't a stumble." I closed the notebook. "Why now?" I asked. Calvin looked at the cradle. "Because that baby's still alive," he said. "And if she hadn't moved when she did, I'd be walking past yellow tape this morning." I didn't. Thank him. Not yet. Because part of me knew what this meant for him. Retaliation, harassment. If Rosetta got out on bail, she'd start the whisper campaign. She always did. "You willing to testify?" I asked. Calvin didn't hesitate. "I already typed it." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded paper, set it next to the notebook. Alessa appeared in the hallway, holding Eve close, her voice barely audible. "You're a good man, Mr. Drew." He dipped his head, almost ashamed. "Not soon enough." She stepped forward, pressed something into his hand. A yellow fabric band with a tiny lavender print. Eve's hospital bracelet, long since cut off. He held it like it was glass. "I want her to grow up knowing some people still did the right thing," she said. Calvin's throat worked, but he didn't speak. He just nodded, turned, and stepped back into the fading light. That night, I added his statement to my evidence folder. And for the first time since the shot, I believed we might win. Rosetta Crail was out on bail by Monday morning. The board didn't say a word. No email, no apology, no statement. Just silence. Like a gun hadn't gone off in our neighborhood. Like a baby hadn't been nearly killed by a woman who still had keys to the HOA office. She resumed her rounds the next day. Not with a gun, but with something worse. A smile. It was thinner than before, more pointed, and now she walked with backup. 2 board members trailed her, clipboards in hand like loyal scribes. They didn't speak, didn't make eye contact. They just followed her down the sidewalks of Redwood Crossings, as she pointed, gestured, and noted. Her kingdom intact. I spotted her from the nursery window while adjusting Eve's monitor. She stopped at our driveway, looked up. We locked eyes. She didn't blink. An hour later, I got an email. Subject: urgent HOA violation. 24-hour compliance required. Message: unauthorized sensor installation on front porch pillar. Breach of community aesthetics policy 11.3. Fines to begin accruing at $250 day until resolution. She was targeting my surveillance gear, the same equipment that recorded her shooting at my child. She didn't even try to hide it. "She's not scared of consequences," I said aloud, turning the monitor toward Alessa. "She's escalating." Alessa didn't take her eyes off Eve. That's what abusers do when they lose control. They don't retreat, they double down. I forwarded the email to the DA's office. Later that evening, someone scraped our mailbox, deep gouges along the paint. No witnesses, no note, just long, purposeful scratches that cut through the white like claw marks. We didn't report it, we documented it, because we'd stopped believing the system would work for us by default. Now we were building one that would expose why it didn't. At the next HOA meeting, Rosetta walked in like nothing had happened. No limp, no brace, no sign she'd been in custody for a felony firearm discharge. She called the meeting to order with a gavel strike and read from the agenda like it was any other Tuesday. First item, noise variance requests from Lot 117. Denied due to scheduling conflict with community quiet hours. Second item, recommendation for removal of outdoor fixtures exceeding the visual compliance limit. Lot 203, Lot 209. That was us, Lot 209. I stood up, calm, measured. My voice didn't need to rise. This board is aware I'm pressing criminal charges against its president. You're also aware that I submitted a full forensics reconstruction of the incident to the DA, Child Protective Services, and ATF. Continuing to issue citations against my home now constitutes retaliation under Section 47 of the Community Charter. Rosetta didn't even look at me. The board will not respond to public threats, she said without pause. This isn't a threat, I replied. It's a documented fact. You discharged a firearm in the direction of an infant. That's not a gray area. That's attempted endangerment. And this board is either complicit or cowardly. Murmurs swept through the room. A few people looked away. One woman near the back clutched her purse tighter. A man from Lot 117 cleared his throat but said nothing. I saw Calvin in the corner. He didn't speak either, but this time he met my eyes. Rosetta banged the gavel again. If no further comments, we'll proceed to the budget discussion. The ATF will be issuing a summons, I said louder. I suggest you prepare. And then I sat back down. She paused, just for a breath. Her fingers tightened on the gavel's handle. That was the first crack. After the meeting, Calvin slipped me a folded note in the parking lot. 2 board members are wavering, it read. They don't want to go down with her, but they're scared. On the back, he'd scribbled a name. Darla Keene, HOA Treasurer. Maybe it wasn't just us anymore. Maybe the silence was cracking. But Rosetta? She'd drawn blood, and she wasn't finished. And neither were we. Darla Keene didn't show up at the next board review session. No explanation, no email. Her chair sat empty, and Rosetta didn't acknowledge it. She just called the meeting to order and motioned for a vote on stricter visual compliance penalties. The other 2 members raised their hands without a word. I was there, seated in the last row of the multi-use room near the community tennis court. It was mostly empty. A few residents showed up late and left early, eyes lowered, questions unasked. But I didn't come for votes. I came to listen, and what I heard changed everything. Rosetta leaned toward the mic, clearing her throat with the same precision she used when marking people for fines. We'll be installing temporary compliance monitors on eastbound lots this week for safety. Compliance monitors. That was new. She didn't elaborate, but I knew what she meant. Sensors, cameras, mics. Probably authorized through a discretionary vote no one had contested. She was deploying surveillance under the guise of community safety, after being recorded trying to shoot my daughter. She wanted control over the narrative, and this time, she'd use technology to erase the story, not expose it. I left early, didn't say a word. But outside the clubhouse, standing beside the notice board, was Darla Keene. Not in her usual blazer, no HOA badge, just a worn cardigan, a tote bag over one shoulder, and a half-drained iced tea in her hand. "Dr. Valor," she said before I could pass. I stopped. "She's going to bury this," Darla said. "You know that, right? She's going to flood the community with noise until no one remembers your baby almost died." "She already started," I said. "But I'm not here for memory. I'm here for proof." She looked over her shoulder, lowered her voice. "I didn't vote on those monitors. She filed it as an emergency decision. The minutes were altered after I left." That got my attention. "You're saying she falsified board records?" "I'm saying the file you'd get if you requested the minutes this morning doesn't match the notes I took." I kept my voice low. "You willing to show me your copy?" Darla nodded. "But not here. She still has access to everything. My email, my board account. I didn't even bring my phone today." She dug into her tote bag and handed me a folded sheet of paper. Not a digital log, not screenshots, handwritten meeting notes in tight cursive, with time stamps, motions, and notations. I scanned it. The compliance monitor agenda item wasn't there. "I have 3 years of these," she said, "and if I disappear from the board entirely, they'll say I was complicit." "You're resigning?" "I already did. I just haven't sent the formal notice." I folded the note and slid it into my jacket. "You know, if this gets submitted, it triggers an audit, right?" She smiled. "That's why I'm giving it to you." That night, I cross-referenced the official HOA site with archived versions from my own daily scraping system. I ran a diff against cached versions of the minutes stored in my home server, and there it was. The line, "Motion approved. Install 3 compliance cameras on lots east of Pond Trail, effective immediately. Vote 3 Monroe." But the original didn't have that line at all. She had altered legal board records. I compiled the timeline. Rosetta's motion added after the meeting, time-stamped 2 hours post-adjournment. File uploaded using an IP traced to a private HOA admin device I had tagged last month for packet sniffing. It was more than fraud. It was tampering. I submitted it to the district attorney the next morning, flagged with a red tag labeled "Chain of Custody Breach, HOA Falsification, Post-Incident Behavior." The DA's office sent back a single sentence: "This meets criteria for administrative criminal review. Proceed." Rosetta's power wasn't just cracking now, it was unraveling. 2 days after I submitted the altered minutes, a white sedan pulled up outside our home just after 9 in the morning. It wasn't marked, no agency logos, just a rental, low profile. But I recognized the woman who stepped out. Marion Fleck, assistant district attorney for the county. She didn't knock right away. She paused, scanned the front of our house, then walked up the path with the kind of posture only a person used to walking past reporters could carry. She had a folder in her hand and a badge clipped low, just enough to flash without announcing it. I opened the door before she raised her fist. "Dr. Valor," she said, nodding. "May I come in?" I led her inside, past the cradle, past the kitchen table where Alessa was soothing Eve with a bottle and one arm wrapped in gauze. Marion paused to glance at the baby, only for a second, but her eyes lingered on the bullet-split rail. "I reviewed your package," she said, setting the folder down. "The forensic data is solid. The metadata trail on the altered HOA minutes, even better." "And Rosetta?" I asked. She opened the folder, pulled out a printed timeline. "There's enough here to justify criminal investigation on at least 2 counts. Tampering with administrative records under state housing law, and retaliatory conduct against a civilian complainant in an open investigation." "She's still patrolling," Alessa said from the kitchen. "Yesterday she walked by with a tablet, scanning our yard." "She's stalling," Marion replied. "She's hoping we'll drop the case before we make it real." I leaned against the counter. "So, make it real." "We will," Marion said. "But first, I need to know how far this goes. Do you believe other board members were aware of the altered documents?" "I know 2 weren't," I said. "One's already resigned. The other's watching carefully." "Then we'll need them both, especially if we want to prove the alteration wasn't just Rosetta acting alone." Marion opened her case folder again and removed a printed subpoena draft. "For Calvin Drew," she said, "your groundskeeper. I want his statement on record, especially if he overheard conversations before or after the incident." "He's ready," I said, scared, but ready. "Good, because I'm not just going after a bullet," she said, her voice hardening. "I'm going after the structure that told this woman she could fire a gun at a baby and still collect dues the next day." Alessa set the bottle down. "Will you charge her?" "If I have enough to tie the falsified minutes to an attempt to suppress forensic evidence, yes. If I can show she retaliated against you or your wife after the incident, double yes. But what I really want," she leaned forward, voice quiet, "what I really want is to make an example out of her so this doesn't happen again." I nodded slowly. She packed the folder, left a card, and said she'd be back once her office signed off on the subpoenas. Then she walked out, quiet and composed, leaving the door open behind her like she expected us to follow through. Later that night, I rewatched the porch footage one last time, not because I needed to, but because I had to remind myself why this mattered. Eve, barely stirring, the lavender plant shaking in the breeze. Rosetta's frame blocking the sunlight as she stepped forward, the flash of her wrist, the flinch, the sound. I froze the frame where the bullet split the walnut edge. Then I muted the audio and just watched. There's a moment between the muzzle rise and the shot where everything looks normal. Rosetta's eyes half closed, her grip steady. No chaos, just precision. That's what stuck with me. She wasn't reacting. She was executing control. I copied that frame, printed it, and placed it on my desk beside the raw data log. Marion was right. This wasn't about one HOA gone rogue. This was about the idea that a position on a neighborhood board made someone untouchable, and the moment Rosetta pulled that trigger, she gave us everything we needed to pull her world apart. The morning Calvin testified, he didn't wear his uniform. No vest, no clipboard, no HOA-issued badge. Just a flannel shirt, buttoned to the throat, and a pair of scuffed boots I remembered from his early maintenance runs. He walked into the county building through the side entrance like he didn't want to be seen, and maybe he didn't, but he showed up. Marion met him in the lobby and gave a small nod. No smile, just acknowledgement. She handed him the statement draft, told him to read it first, then add whatever he needed. He didn't sit, just leaned against the wall and read it standing, lips moving silently as he scanned the lines. I waited across the hall, watching through the glass. Calvin looked smaller under those fluorescent lights, like the building had been built to make men like him disappear. He kept rubbing his hands like the words on the paper burned. When he finally signed, it wasn't with hesitation. It was with both hands flat on the table and a breath that had waited too long. Marion came out first. He confirmed Rosetta made several verbal threats in the days before the shooting, including that she intended to eliminate the disruption on Lot 2 sign. Alessa, standing beside me, went pale. She used that word, eliminate? Twice, Marion said. He documented them in his field logs, dated, initialed. Will he testify in court? He says yes, but he wants one thing. Calvin stepped out a moment later, face stiff but composed. He handed me a folded piece of paper. I want this submitted if I don't make it to the hearing. It was a handwritten addendum, not just about the shooting, but about every time Rosetta used. The HOA's silence to drown someone else. The flag she ordered removed on Veterans Day. The warning citation to the widowed mother whose son sang on the porch. The erased complaints from 2 families who left without selling. Their property values cratered by stacked fines. She wanted this place perfect, Calvin said quietly, but only if perfect meant no one else's life showed through. You understand once this goes public, she'll come for you, I said. She already did. He lifted his sleeve, bruising, yellow-green, deep, spreading from his forearm to his wrist. She caught me near the storage unit, he said, told me to hand over my work logs. When I said no, she grabbed my arm and tried to take my keys. I pulled away. She tripped, blamed me for assault. You report it? He shook his head. Didn't want to make it worse. Figured if I came here, it'd mean something. It does, I said. It means everything. Later that day, Marion filed for a protective order on his behalf. We walked him to his truck. Eve was in her carrier, sleeping. Calvin paused before opening the door. She's lucky, he said, to have parents who fight. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just nodded and watched him drive off, the dented tailgate lifting dust as he disappeared down the courthouse hill. That night, Marion called. Her voice was clipped but charged. We're issuing a formal motion to suspend Rosetta from any HOA duties pending criminal review, she said, and we're freezing HOA authority to issue new fines until the audit is complete. How long before she's removed? Depends if she complies with the summons. If she doesn't, she won't, I said. Then I'll file for a bench warrant. After the call, I walked out to the porch. The cradle sat in silence, patched but not replaced. The bullet scar had been sanded, but the grain still caught in the wrong light. Alessa had tied a piece of white cloth around one rail, Eve's first hospital wrap. The wind was warm, the street was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful, not yet, because until Rosetta Crale stood in a courtroom and faced what she'd done, until the HOA's rules were dragged into daylight, this silence was just a lie dressed up to look like order. And I wasn't done telling the truth. I spent the next 48 hours doing what I did best, building a case that would leave no room for spin. Rosetta had years of plausible deniability behind her. Every citation, every comment, every escalation had been buried under official-sounding language. Non-compliance, visual disruption, community uniformity. She didn't just hide behind policy, She weaponized it. But sound doesn't lie. Not when you know where to listen. I pulled every audio file from my home system and layered them. Not just the day of the shooting. Everything. Every HOA meeting where she spoke within mic range. Every late-night patrol I'd tracked with motion sensors. The ambient data alone covered months of patterns. She had a rhythm, a cadence, a habit of issuing threats before filing formal notices. And I had proof of it. I wrote an algorithm to flag voice spikes between certain emotional markers: frustration, anger, contempt. It narrowed 1,000 hours of porch audio down to 32 distinct moments, where Rosetta's tone turned from enforcement to something else. One phrase repeated in variations across 6 of them. They'll learn the rules, not follow, not respect. Learn. As if we were subjects. As if she was the architect of control. On file number 17, timestamped 3 days before the shooting, she muttered, "I'll handle the noise myself if they won't." That clip was the first nail. The second came from Darla. She reached out through an encrypted email relay I set up for whistleblowers. Anonymous submission of digital evidence, time-stamped, and routed through an off-site server. She uploaded 3 PDFs, 2 voice memos, and a copy of her original resignation letter, dated 2 weeks before she actually stepped down. In the second voice memo, she recorded Rosetta behind the clubhouse during a private conversation with one of the remaining board members. "I don't care if she's feeding that kid oxygen through gold tubing. If it's in view, it's a violation. I'll fine them into moving." Alessa listened to that one with me, her fingers curled into fists. She didn't cry, she didn't yell, she just whispered, "Let's finish this." I layered the recordings into a multi-angle analysis, pairing audio with location tags, timestamps, and visual confirmation from camera archives. Then I overlaid HOA citations and violation notices across the same timeline. Rosetta's pattern became undeniable: verbal threat, surveillance, citation, retaliation, threat, surveillance, citation, retaliation. The baby was never the first target, but Eve was the one she finally aimed for, literally. Marion called again on Sunday. "I have good news and something heavier," she said. "Start with the heavy," I replied. The ATF has confirmed Rosetta's Glock was modified. The trigger pressure was lowered beyond safe specs. She claims it was for hand comfort, but it violates the terms of her concealed carry license. That was more than negligence. It was recklessness with a weapon in a residential zone. Grounds for revocation. Grounds for criminal charges. "And the good?" I asked. "I've secured court approval to freeze all HOA enforcement powers temporarily. No new citations, no board actions, no property penalties. She's officially out of tools." I sat back, exhaling for what felt like the first time in days. "And the summons?" "It's been served. Court date is set. 2 weeks, full evidentiary hearing." She paused. "Her lawyer called me. He's trying to float a plea. Wants to keep this quiet." "Then he doesn't know me," I said. "No," Marion agreed, "but he will." That night, I printed everything. Not for court, for me, for Alessa, for Eve. We laid the pages across the dining room table. Evidence files, annotated citations, audio transcripts, witness statements. The physical weight of truth. The thing Rosetta thought she could bend. Alessa picked up the photo I'd taken of the bullet hole. It had splintered clean down the edge, leaving a scar across the cradle's curve like a lightning strike. "She thought this would shut us up," she said. "No," I replied. "She thought we'd be scared enough to let it slide." We weren't. And now she had nothing left to hide behind. I arrived at the courthouse before sunrise, not because I needed to, because I couldn't sleep. The night before, I sat in the nursery with Eve, just watching her breathe. Each tiny rise of her chest was a reminder of how close we came to losing her, of what Rosetta tried to erase in the name of compliance. Alessa stayed home with Eve that morning. We didn't want her in that building, didn't want her in the same room as the woman who pointed a gun at our child. Marion met me outside the security checkpoint, a plain folder tucked under her arm, coffee in the other hand. "She's already here," she said. "Arrogant or desperate? Both." We didn't speak again until we were inside. The hearing wasn't open to the public yet. This was the evidentiary phase, A judge would determine if Rosetta's HOA actions, the discharge of her weapon, and the falsified board records were sufficient for full criminal proceedings. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No jury box yet, just a judge, one court reporter, Rosetta's attorney, and Rosetta herself seated beside him, spine stiff, face unreadable. She didn't look at me when I walked in, but she knew I was there. Marion opened with the forensic timeline. She didn't embellish, she didn't grandstand, just laid it out, clean and brutal. The defendant, in her capacity as HOA president, issued 5 escalating citations to the Valor family over a 4-week period, she began, each preceded by verbal threats documented through direct surveillance audio. She played the clips one by one. Rosetta's voice filled the courtroom. If they won't move the cradle, I will. The baby's noise is a nuisance. Let's see if a fine every 2 days changes their minds. The judge didn't react outwardly, but I saw his pen pause on the page. Next came the surveillance footage, the silent approach, the draw, the discharge, the still frame of Eve's cradle catching the bullet. Marion explained the acoustic breakdown. Trigger pressure, discharge timing, angle of elevation. Then she handed the judge the altered HOA minutes, with Calvin's testimony corroborating the discrepancy. Finally, she entered Exhibit R, the ATF report confirming the trigger, a modification. When it was over, Rosetta's lawyer rose. His defense was mechanical, devoid of emotion. He argued that the gun discharged accidentally, that his client had no intent to harm, that HOA enforcement fell under civil jurisdiction, not criminal malice. He leaned heavily on her clean record, said she was passionate about community order and mischaracterized by aggressive tactics from the complainant. That was me. Marion didn't interrupt. She just let him talk himself hollow. When the judge called a 10-minute recess, I stepped out into the hallway. Calvin was already there, sitting alone on the bench outside, hat in his hands. "You were brave in there," I said. "I was tired of watching her get away with it," he replied. "Tired of acting like it wasn't happening." He pulled something from his coat, a folded blueprint, an old map of Redwood Crossings from when it was first developed. He tapped the shaded area near the park. "My father helped build this place," he said, "back when it was just a few homes and a promise of peace. Not silence, not control. Peace." I unfolded the map, traced the outline of Lot 209, our home. "She thought we didn't belong," I said. Calvin shook his head. "She forgot who this place was meant for." We walked back in together when the break ended. Marion had one last exhibit. She placed Eve's hospital bracelet and the wood fragment from the cradle, still marked by the bullet scar, on the table. "No testimony needed," she said. "Just facts." The judge took 5 minutes. No delay, no jury. When he returned, his voice was steady. "Based on the weight of evidence presented, I find probable cause for criminal prosecution. The charges will proceed to trial." Rosetta didn't blink, didn't flinch. But I saw it, right before she stood, the twitch in her jaw, the crack. Control was slipping, and this time, she couldn't cite her way out. Rosetta's trial date was set for the following month, but everything started unraveling before she could even step back inside a courtroom. 3 days after the judge ruled the charges would proceed, a leak hit the local press. Someone inside the courthouse, maybe a clerk, maybe someone in the DA's office, sent footage from the evidentiary hearing to a journalist at Channel 4. It wasn't just the video of the shooting, it was the audio. They aired the clip on the 6 o'clock broadcast, unedited. "I'll handle the noise myself if they won't," Rosetta's voice crackled through car radios and kitchen televisions across the county. And then, the gunshot. In a matter of hours, the story spread beyond local news. A headline on a national outlet read, "HOA president allegedly fires on infant, cites visual violation." They used her name, her face, her title. There was no hiding now. By morning, protesters were outside the gates of Redwood Crossings. Some were quiet, others held signs. "Silence isn't peace. Babies aren't violations." And one that read simply, "She shot at a cradle." I stayed inside that first day, not out of fear, but because I didn't want the story to become about me. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. But Rosetta, she couldn't help herself. At the emergency HOA board meeting that evening, called hastily over Zoom after the gates were locked down, she tried to maintain control. "Please," she said, voice shaking with rehearsed composure, "we have to remember that this community is still under my guidance. We can't let hysteria rewrite facts." Darla was on the call. So was Calvin. This time, neither stayed quiet. "I resign," Darla said, before Rosetta could continue. "Effective immediately." "You already did," Rosetta snapped. "I'm doing it publicly this time," Darla said, "so there's a record you can't delete." Then Calvin unmuted his mic. "You fined a man for putting a wind chime on his porch," he said, voice low and steady. "You made a woman cry because her son left sidewalk chalk art. You erased complaints, threatened families, and said nothing when someone's oxygen machine was called community noise. Now you're on trial for trying to handle a baby?" Rosetta leaned closer to the camera. "You've both been manipulated. You don't know the full context." "I saw the context," Calvin cut in. "It had a barrel and a recoil." The call ended 5 minutes later, and the next day, Rosetta's lawyer filed a gag order request to stop the media circulation. It was denied. Meanwhile, Marion doubled down. She submitted new documentation linking Rosetta's prior fines to families with children under 5. 92% of them, over the last calendar year, had been cited more than twice. The pattern was now undeniable. Still, we prepared for trial, just in case. I built a presentation frame by frame, not just showing what Rosetta did, but what the board allowed her to become. A culture of silence, a pattern of submission, the kind of quiet that isn't natural, it's engineered. The night before the pre-trial conference, Alessa sat beside me at the table while Eve slept on her chest. She watched the footage one last time, not to relive it, but to own it. "She did this thinking no one would believe us," she said. I nodded. "She did it thinking the system would protect her. And now? Now the system is watching." Across the street, Rosetta's porch lights were dark. Her car hadn't moved in 2 days. Someone had painted the word "liar" across the HOA welcome sign that morning. It was gone by noon, but the damage had been done. She wasn't just losing authority. She was losing the illusion. Marion sent me a final message before the hearing. "Bring the cradle panel and the bracelet." I placed both into a cloth-lined case that night. The wood still carried the faint scent of oil and lavender. The bracelet was soft, fragile, but it had survived, just like Eve. And now it was time to finish what Rosetta started. The courthouse was full by 8:30. Not just attorneys or reporters, but neighbors, strangers. People I'd never met from other counties, other states. Parents with infants strapped to their chests, veterans in hats. A woman with a sign that simply read, "We heard the shot." Inside the courtroom, Rosetta sat alone at the defendant's table. Her attorney hadn't arrived yet. She wore a black blazer over her HOA nameplate blouse. No gun this time, no clipboard, no board members sitting behind her. She looked smaller than she ever had, but her jaw was still set like granite. Alessa and I entered through the side door. Marion was already there, organizing files at the prosecution table. When she saw me, she gave a slight nod, then tapped the padded cloth case beside her. "Did you bring it?" I opened it slowly. Inside, the wood panel from the cradle, still cracked through the grain, and Eve's original hospital bracelet, tied around the splintered edge. The courtroom lights caught the scuff where the bullet had split the varnish. "Let them see it," Marion whispered. Judge Renner entered a few minutes later. The room rose, then settled. The trial began. Opening statements came and went. Rosetta's attorney emphasized her record of service, her concern for community safety, the narrative of a tragic accident misrepresented by technical experts. He never once said the word baby, only minor or resident. Then Marion stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "What you're going to see today," she began, "isn't just a gunshot. It's a pattern. It's a structure, a system that allowed a woman with power to confuse her discomfort for danger and act accordingly." She stepped to the evidence screen, played the footage, Rosetta's approach, her posture, the motion of her hand reaching for the Glock, Eve's cry, then the shot. Even though I'd watched it hundreds of times, it still hit me like a wave. The silence after, the frozen air, the lavender plant trembling from the shock wave. No one spoke. Marion didn't either. She just let the moment sit, thick and stifling. Then she placed the cradle panel on the table in front of the jury. "This is what the bullet hit," she said. This held a 6-pound infant. She didn't raise it, didn't pass it around, just left it there. Wood, memory, proof. Next came Calvin. He walked slowly to the witness stand, eyes on the floor. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and then said it, steady and clear. She said she'd handle the noise herself. "What did she mean by that?" Marion asked. "I thought she meant another citation," Calvin replied. "I was wrong." He testified to her threats, her verbal aggression, the altered HOA minutes, the bruise on his wrist when she tried to rip the maintenance, logs out of his hand. "She didn't lose control," he said. "She used it." Rosetta's attorney tried to rattle him. "Mr. Drew, are you aware that your employment with the HOA was considered probationary?" "I'm aware she said that the day after I submitted my statement to the DA." He didn't shake, didn't waver. When Alessa took the stand, she brought Eve with her. There was no requirement for it, no legal tactic. But she wanted them to see her, alive, whole, real. Alessa held her gently, rocking slightly as she spoke. "I heard the safety click off before I saw the gun," she said. "I didn't think, I just grabbed my baby and moved." Marion handed her a photo, taken the night of the shooting. Eve's face red from crying, Alessa's cheek streaked with blood. "You're a mother," Marion said. What did that moment feel like? Alessa's eyes welled. She looked down at Eve. Like someone decided my daughter was too inconvenient to exist. There were no outbursts, no shouting, just the sound of someone in the gallery trying not to cry. Marion rested her case by placing the bracelet on top of the cradle wood. "She was 6 weeks premature," she said. "That's how small her wrist was." Judge Renner called for recess. The jury would return in the morning for deliberation. As we walked out, Rosetta finally looked at me. No hate, no apology. Just the stunned realization of someone who thought the silence would always protect her. The jury came back in under 4 hours. Alessa and I sat in the gallery, Eve curled asleep in her sling against her mother's chest. The courtroom was at capacity again. Every bench filled, media along the back wall, hushed conversations circling the room like wind through dry leaves. Even Judge Renner seemed to sense the weight of what was about to land. Rosetta sat at the defense table with her arms crossed, face stony. She hadn't looked at the jury once since they had left to deliberate. She didn't now. The bailiff stood. "All rise." We stood. The foreman, a middle-aged man in a gray polo, hands tight on the rail, cleared his throat and delivered it with one breath. "Guilty on all counts." Marion didn't smile. She just nodded once and closed her folder. Rosetta didn't move. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't cry. But her shoulders sank. It was the first real collapse we'd seen from her. Not anger, not denial, just the quiet realization that her grip was gone. The judge thanked the jury, set sentencing for the following week, and called the courtroom to order. Reporters surged outside. I stayed in my seat. Marion approached the bench, spoke briefly with the judge, then turned to me. "She waived her right to appeal on the record," she said. "She knows it's over." I nodded. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the protest signs had changed. Some still carried the words, "She shot at a cradle," but others now read, "Let them sleep in." Peace, HOAs aren't above the law, and Eve's law now. That last one wasn't ours. It came from a woman I'd never met, a state representative who filed a motion the same morning as the verdict, a proposal to ban the use of firearms by HOA officers during enforcement actions. They called it Eve's Law in the press release. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The next week, Rosetta was sentenced to 12 years, 8 minimum, no early release. Reckless endangerment of a minor with a firearm, falsification of administrative documents, and aggravated misconduct under a position of authority. When the gavel fell, I looked over to see Calvin in the back row. He nodded once. Outside the courthouse, I set the wood panel from the cradle on the stone steps and laid Eve's bracelet beside it, not as evidence, as a reminder. 3 weeks later, the Redwood Crossings HOA voted to dissolve the existing board. A new community charter was adopted, one that stripped enforcement power from individuals and required third-party arbitration for violations. Alessa and I didn't attend the vote. We were in the backyard that day, planting lavender around the edge of the porch. The cradle sat nearby, restored but unoccupied. Eve had outgrown it, but we kept it on the porch anyway, not as a memorial, as a promise, because peace isn't silence, it's safety. And safety has a sound, quiet breathing, soft wind, the rustle of leaves in the trees, and a child sleeping without fear. We hear it now, every night. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. HOA Karen forced my autistic son to speak at board hearing. She didn't know I was a federal disability rights prosecutor. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?